Hey everyone, it's Rob from Rob's Movie Collection. I've been seeing a lot of questions, tags going around this little community, and it's given me some ideas for a couple of questions that I have. And here is one that I can ask to you guys. Growing up, I've always been into movies, probably like a lot of you, and when you're not at the movies, a lot of us would be reading movie magazines of some kind. There was a one from the 50s and 60s called Famous Monsters of Movie Land, or Filmland, I think it was. Well, I'm not sure. But it was created by Forey Ackerman, and he was a great guy. And stuff like that, and different types of movie magazines. So, especially back in the day in the 70s and 80s and 60s before then, when we didn't have the media that we have now. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have DVDs, Blu-rays, or even videotapes. So all you could do is, you'd go, if you weren't at a movie, the only way to kind of read about movies or to know about movies was to read about them in magazines and such. So my question is, what magazine did you read in the day, or even today, if you follow today, to get your kind of movie information from? Now, for me, growing up, I wasn't like the other guys. I wasn't into the cliche guy stuff. I really wasn't into cars or sports or any of that stuff. I was always kind of a geek, a movie geek, and a sci-fi fantasy movie geek. So back in those days, I remember I would go to with a friend of mine to we'd stop off at this newsstand on Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood, and he would go and get Billboard magazine because he was into music, and I would get what to me and to my kind was the Sports Illustrated of magazines for the geeks and nerds, which was called Starlog Magazine. Yeah, this is what I used to read when I was younger, and would still be reading if I could. Unfortunately, Starlog no longer exists. But this was the magazine if you were into movies, and specifically sci-fi fantasy movies. They would report all these wonderful things about the movies and all these and TV. The great thing about them was that they would also report, have articles on old actors, but also behind-the-scenes stuff, especially special effects, and they would have articles on composers and individual special effects technicians and producers and directors. And every time a big movie would come out, they'd do an article on it, and you'd have the covers here, and Flash Gordon, of course, a lot of Star Wars stuff. They would have spin-off magazines devoted especially to special effects, like Cinemagic. Starlog presents Cinemagic, and hold tributes to Ray Harryhausen, and just really, prosthetic devices and makeup and stuff like that. And I was really into this stuff growing up, and I was interested. Now, these days you can just go to YouTube and say, well, how do I do stop motion animation? Well, here's a YouTube video. Well, back in those days, we didn't have all that information, so we'd have magazines like this. I can't really even say magazines. This is really one of the few, or maybe the only one at the time, that would show you things like how to do stop-motion animations, how these guys would do it. Sometimes amateur filmmakers, cameras and stuff, and how to do makeup effects. Now, this sort of thing you can see on YouTube, step by step these days, but back in those days, this is all we had, and that's what was great about it. And I loved these magazines, and Starlog was just the best one. And you'd have all these articles on, of course, a lot of Star Wars stuff, and all these actors and all the movies that came out in those days. And I really kind of miss this magazine. It kind of just went out of business. It went into it was at the same time with another magazine called Fangoria, which is more for the horror fans, which I believe is still out there. But for me, it was always Starlog magazine, and it had all these great articles and the latest sci-fi movies, and that's what I always loved. So for me, it was Starlog magazine, and still is. I wish it was still out there. I know there are a lot of different magazines out there for movies nowadays, like Empire and SFX magazines and stuff like that. But unfortunately, these days, all the writers tend to write the way they do on the internet. They're very smarmy. They're very opinionated. Even when they're just doing an article on a new movie, they got to stick in their smarmy opinions, and it all just sounds like internet trolling to me. But this magazine, and these days they used to just report on the things and show you things from behind the scenes and all. And it was a great magazine, and that's why I have so many of them now in a box in plastic and all that. But I just loved it, and I kind of miss it a lot. So it was a lot of fun. So what magazines did you read or still read today, if they're still around, that kind of got you into movies? They don't have to be, of course, sci-fi movies, but there's so many magazines out there devoted to movies. I know there are books as well, but what magazine did you pick up, like on a monthly basis or weekly basis, and to read up on the latest movies or behind-the-scenes movies and events and stuff like that? So that's your question, and that's your tag. Okay, so check it out. Keep watching movies, and yeah, have fun with this one.